Hello, my name is Sonia Romines. I'm with the Tennessee Journalist, and I'm here today with Dr. Curtis Bell, one of the assistant professors of political science with the University of Tennessee, and his research focuses on civil war and the politics of failing states. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me today.
Thank you.
And maybe you could tell us a little bit about the background of what's going on right now with the Ukraine crisis.
Sure. Well,
or leading up to it, I'm sorry.
Sure. Well, briefly, Ukraine was part of the Soviet Union until the early 1990s. And when the Soviet Union dissolved, there were competing interests in Ukraine. Some of the people in Ukraine wanted to have a Ukraine that was linked a little bit more closely to Western Europe, and others, especially in the south and east, sought a Ukraine that had closer relations with Russia. So in some ways, part of what we're seeing now is a manifestation of tensions that have been going on for 15 or so years since the breakup of the Soviet Union.
And then the events leading immediately up to the current situation?
Well, the Ukrainian economy has been in a bit of a tailspin since the recession. The recovery has been very, very poor, really non-existent. And this led to increased pressure on the government to increase its economic relationships with its neighbors, especially to the west, to Europe. So one of the immediate triggers of what we've seen happen recently is the Ukrainian government had a deal lined up with the European Union. It's one that Ukraine's former pro-Russian president, Yanukovych, backed away from, and this is what started those protests we saw in Kiev. And when those protests led to Yanukovych's government falling and Yanukovych fleeing the country, this is what brought Russia into
Why did President Yanukovych back away from the accords after he had repeatedly said that he would sign them?
Well, because Yanukovych is he's subject to the will of Russia as well. And Russia has long been very sensitive about increased ties between its former Soviet states and the West, whether through the European Union or through NATO.
There is a really big cultural split in the Ukraine between those who consider themselves Ukrainian and those who identify as Russian, and that's where a big part of this comes from. Crimea identifies as Russian. So, can you discuss that a little bit?
Sure. Today, most estimates put the population of Crimea at about 60% Russian speakers. Most of the rest are Ukrainian, or a group that's native to Crimea, specifically called the Tartars. The demographics here are a little bit complicated because of the way Crimea came to be majority Russian. This happened only after a man-made famine under Stalin in the 1930s that really decimated the Ukrainian and Tatar population. And a little bit later under Stalin, right around the time of World War II, Stalin forcibly depopulated the area, sending Ukrainians and Tartars into Central Asia and Siberia in a terrible, terrible round of ethnic cleansing that resulted in the deaths of about half of that population. And they were only allowed to return to Crimea in the late 1980s when the Soviet Union broke up. So it is true that a majority of the population in Crimea today is Russian, but we have to consider that fact in light of this, in the context of this genocide that's occurred within living memory.
Crimea used to be in Russia, and then it was gifted in the 1950s, I believe, to the Ukraine. So do they have a legitimate claim to taking it back at this point?
Well, it's tricky. It's territory that has passed hands many, many times, even before Russia was in control. This is territory that is right on the border between Europe and Asia, really. So at points it's been Greek, it's been Roman, it's been Ottoman, it's been Russian, it's been Ukrainian, it's been independent. So it's gone back and forth many, many times. Today, the majority of the people living in Crimea are Russian speakers. The local leader there, who's a prime minister, has come out mostly in support of what President Putin has done. And it's complicated. It can be argued both ways.
As of yesterday, members of Crimea's parliament had asked to join Russia and look at the decision to referendum on March 16th. Is there anything that Ukraine can do to stop this?
We clearly don't want it to happen, but it looks like this vote is going to happen. And it's important to understand that both the West and Russia are trying to legitimize their actions. And for Russia, the best way to legitimize their actions is to make this look less like a hostile military takeover and more like something that the Crimean people wanted. And a vote is one of the best ways to show that this is what the Crimean people wanted. And we'll see if that vote looks like a free and fair election or not. That's yet to be seen.
And it seems like the West, all they can really do at this point is put more sanctions out there, and that's really doesn't seem to. It's not doing anything really. So, is there any way for them to back up or to help the Ukraine in any other way?
Well, even sanctions against Russia are very tough. The United States is talking about sanctions quite a bit, but the United States' European allies are backing away from that kind of rhetoric because they have closer economic relationships with Russia. So in many ways, sanctions will cost the United States much, much less than it will cost some of these European allies. And I think that's why most of what we've seen is support for the Ukrainian government rather than punishment for the Russian government.
Especially since they have offered several billion in aid to the country as well.
Yeah, the government of Ukraine up in Kiev has asked for about 35 billion. The United States responded by promising 1 billion, and the EU has promised another 15 billion. So still pretty far short of what Ukraine wants, but there's a lot of money on the table.